Will 2020 be the lost decade? Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here with my stein of coffee as always. I thought we'd have a look at this ABC article discussing a Reserve Bank governor's concern that the pandemic shadow could last for years. Is 2020 going to be a lost decade? Now, since the GFC, our growth per capita has been below trend with regards to GDP. So we're still growing. Well, up until last quarter, we were still growing, but that growth was below the trend, below average. So, we're still getting better, but the betterness is getting worse, to put it in a terrible way. So let's have a look at this article. The Australian economy is outperforming, but the pandemic shadow could last years, warns the RBAs. And how much of that outperformance is, due to misplaced optimism of a V-shaped recovery, significant government intervention into the economy, and even the RBA were proposing a complete shutdown of the real estate transaction industry to avoid any concern of a fall. But that's their caper, isn't it? Intervention. The Reserve Bank governor says the Australian dollar is up off recent lows because of how well the nation has handled the pandemic so far, but warns that will change if there's no major economic reform. I thought it was also because there were hopes that China was looking to do better, and we're proxy for China in many ways. Speaking during his online panel discussion hosted by AN News, Crawford School of Public Policy, Philip Lowe said a recent rise in the local currency from the pandemic lows of 55 cents to 68.5, including a recent brief stay above 70, was a reflection of the nation's pandemic performance. So I find a lot in the markets, the more I look into it, it's all to do with comparisons in many ways. Where unemployment numbers are better than expected, or they beat the predictions or the consensus with their profit forecast, and that affects it all. And here, our handling of this pandemic compared to other nations has been much better just based on the numbers. I would like a lower currency in terms of macroeconomic outcomes. It would help reduce unemployment and lift inflation closer to target. But at the moment, I think it's really hard to argue that the Australian dollar is overvalued, he said. We need to remember that exchange rates are relative prices, and health outcomes in Australia have been relatively good, and the economic outcomes so far have been relatively good, and I think the future is relatively good compared to many other countries as well. And commodity prices have held up. Well, iron ore has gone up, and Australia's a quarry. We export a lot of natural resources. So the issue is, there's a few things. He's arguing for a lower dollar because it will have some benefits. But the problem with that is it's going to have an impact to a big portion of our economy. And we'll just jump here. So this is the Observatory of Economic Complexity. We can see here, these are all the items that Australia is exporting. Coal, iron ore, 48 billion, 57 billion in coal. We're exporting them to all of these other nations around the world, but we're also importing all of these items. Now, with a higher dollar, it's more cost effective for us to buy things. Remember when the dollar was over $1 USD? Wasn't that fantastic? I remember that. That's just about the time we bought we did a crowdfunding of a laser cutter. And then it took so long, so they said you can all get refunds. And we bought it at $1.10, and I think we got a refund. It was like 80 cents or 70 cents to the dollar, something low. So we actually made a profit through that whole pain. But the thing is, with a stronger dollar, these will be hopefully cheaper, but these will be less competitive. Iron ore is doing quite well at the moment. We'll go to trading economics because of issues with Brazil, the second biggest supplier in the world, and potentially, it's at 103 for 62 FE and 104 there, and potentially demand from China increasing. We'll just jump in here to have a look. There you go, everyone. Remember when there was concerns that it would hit below $50? That's what our government's budget is based on. So the Australian dollar is not rising on any expectation of looming interest rate increases which Dr. Lowe again argued are a long way off. So we're going to have very, well, no increase to the cash rate in the foreseeable future. I think it's likely we're going to see interest rates at their current level for years, he said. So we could change the framework, but I don't think it's going to change the outlook for interest rates over the next few years, given the deflationary forces in the world economy, the large output gaps that exist, and the savings investment dynamics right around the world. I think we're going to have low interest rates for a long period of time. So borrowing more won't resolve economic problems. While interest rates are likely to remain at record lows for years, Dr. Lowe tentatively weighed into the debate about whether government support payments such as JobKeeper should remain in place for longer than the current late September end date. Once we build the bridge, it's always about building a bridge, isn't it? And we get to the other side and the recovery is taking place, I think we do face a world where there will be a shadow from the virus for quite a few years. People will be risk averse. They won't want to borrow. In Australia, we're going to have lower population dynamics, he predicted. And that's going to have an impact on property. If anyone went to any of Harry Dent's talks, he's big on demographics and big on population. And, well, we're going to have a hit to our migration. We're going to have a hit to population. And that's all going to have an impact on Australian property, on the demand for our property. And property is pretty much one of it's our love affair. It's our national sport. So unless we change something, we're going to have a world of slower growth in Australia. And if that's the world we're in, we can't resolve that problem by just continuing to borrow. We can't borrow to build the bridge. We can't borrow to address the slower growth worldwide. Instead, Dr. Lowe argued, urging policymakers to use the crisis to make long-term changes that might enhance productivity and economic growth. What we can do is reform, he continued. And that's right on the money. That is the real opportunity of this. Whenever you have a big crisis like this, hopefully we can get some reform here in Australia. And the list of areas we should do reform is well known. They include tax, infrastructure, human capital, industrial relations, regulation, entrepreneurship, and R&D development. If we don't address those areas, then I think we'll just meander along with the kind of mediocre growth. Do you think there's a political will, though, here in Australia to actually make real changes, not just tokenistic changes? We've had it so good for so long. We've had it really easy here in Australia. 29 years of growth. Do you think there's the will to make the drastic changes that are necessary? Let me know in the comments, everyone. What reforms would you want for tax or infrastructure or human capital? You know, if your super is invested, Australian super looking at becoming a little bit more nationalistic. Wouldn't that be good? Investing in infrastructure projects. What about potable water increases? What about the aim of getting Australian power production to be the cheapest on the planet? Wouldn't that be a great goal? In saying that, the Reserve Bank governor gave a nod to the Morrison government for some of its recent announcements. I've been encouraged recently that the government has moved in a number of these areas, Dr. Lowe added, also saying it would be appropriate to borrow to make investments in our future. Internationally, Dr. Lowe said central bank governors and officials have been meeting regularly via video conference organised mainly through the Bank for International Settlements, the Swiss-based central bank for central banks. He said recent discussions had been very different from those about the initial concerns when markets started panicking about the pandemic in late February. In March and April, we were talking about the extreme volatility in our markets and, worryingly, the dislocation of government bond markets, which were affecting the risk-free yield curve everywhere around the world, he observed. And then our discussions turned to the really terrible consequences for the labour market, for people, of the virus and economic downturn, and how we should respond in terms of policy. So, there we go. Calls for drastic reform here in Australia. And the question I put to you, is there the political will to do it? I'd love to see some experiments. I'd love to see some special economic regions set up with really drastic changes to the way things are done here. Maybe, area with no minimum wage. And then with other reduced burdens on the citizens of that area to offset those changes. Wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be a good experiment to compare and contrast? That would be the best way to see what happens. You know, free market zone. That'd be great. Do you think it'll happen? What would you suggest? What interventions, what radical changes would you like? I just hope we don't head down a sharp left. You know, civilizations have tried that socialism before, guys. I'm sure a lot of people would love to live in the fantasy that they have in their head, but I think reality, is a cruel teacher, and we've seen that played out in Seattle. We really have. So, as always, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Do you think the next decade is going to be a lost decade? Or will it be one of reform, innovation, and a new future for Australia? Could there be a positive coming out of all of this? Or am I just enjoying my morning coffee a bit too much? I won't let that optimism creep back in again. I'm sorry, everyone. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments down below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the content I do here, there's a few ways you can. You can join the channel on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us via our affiliate links at Amazon or eBay or Independent Reserve and Kucoin. You can buy our merch from HeiseSays, the pocket squares you see behind me. You can support us using Gold Pass from the Perth Mint or via PayPal. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.